We're talking about data centers, and one of the subjects on everyone's lips is hyperconvergence. I'm seeing it all around CiscoLive. That, combined with security, is something we're going to talk to two absolute experts about right now. With me is Ariel from Stratoscale, Mike from GuardTime, and Dror from Guardicore. We're talking about data center, specifically around security and hyperconvergence. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you very much indeed for giving up your time. Hyperconvergence and security fit together, and of course data center is a very, very broad subject, so I'm very glad that we've got people from sort of different perspectives and spectrums of the subject. Who wants to start me off? I think from my own point of view, it would be very interesting to understand a little bit about hyperconvergence.
Certainly, I'd love to help you with that. So hyperconvergence is about collapsing hardware, making everything that fit in multiple boxes fit into a single box. It's about breaking the barriers between functions and placing them in a single place. And that naturally creates a lot of challenges about functionality as well as security, and not being able to separate things physically into different locations.
Thank you very much for giving that in such a concise way. You mentioned security there, and Mike, I wanted to bring you in on that. Obviously, one of your company's focuses is around security. How much of an ever-present challenge is that, or how often do companies face that throughout on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, absolutely. It's everywhere and all the time. But I think really the sort of principles of security haven't really changed much. And what GuardTime is really focusing on is integrity. And the idea here is that if you can guarantee the integrity of infrastructure, then you can guarantee the absence of compromise. And for the last 40 years, people have thought in security terms of confidentiality, so encryption and PKI. The approach GuardTime takes is to use blockchain, so you can provide this immutable proof that your infrastructure is in the correct state. And that changes very much how you manage security, because you're no longer searching for vulnerabilities. You actually have this mechanism to verify you're in a good state.
I wanted to ask you more about blockchain a little bit later on, because it's one of those topics that, of course, comes up from time to time. And I think still a lot of people don't fully understand it. But Dror, I want to pull you in on this. From your perspective and Guardicore's perspective, what do you see as I guess the most sort of significant challenges around both security and perhaps if you have a view on the wider topic?
So first of all, I have to give a contrary opinion to what we just heard from Mike, in that while the basic concept of security concepts have not changed and maybe will never change, the legacy approach to security, especially as we look at network security, which has been bulk of the security we've seen in networks, simply does not work and fails again and again in data center environments, and even more so in converged data center environment and hyperconverged environments. So
I totally agree, by the way.
Cool. So things like deep packet inspection and the very function of a firewall, which makes total sense and work very well on the perimeter and sometimes on campus networks, totally break down miserably, I would say, inside the data center. And the reason we started this company, Guardicore, is all about rethinking security and especially network security in that unique environment.
Ariel, I want to pull you back in on this. You mentioned that security is a consideration with hyperconverged systems. Is it a more significant concern to customers, do you think?
Well, the biggest enemy for data centers is actually complexity. We're seeing a world transitioning away from value being placed in hardware to value being placed in functionality and capability that is exposed on top. There's a tectonic shift that's happening in anything to do with cloud, and that's the emergence of Amazon, or specifically AWS, and what it represents in what are we consuming, what are we using as IT services. And then there's the role of the infrastructure to provide that. In Stratoscale, we're focusing on delivering the software that requires to transform any data center into an AWS region that allows you to use the best practices from the public cloud in your own environment. And in that environment, we are dealing with logical resources, with applications. We're not dealing with the physical separation between the different boxes. The security approach that is relevant when you're constructing your data center from boxes is completely different when you're constructing your data center from these resources that are residing in a virtual environment.
Things are moving fast, and they're always moving fast. It's of course the very, very nature of technology. But if we just sort of look forward over the next 12 to 24 months, what do you think the most significant innovations are going to be within this area? Like if I could bring you
certainly at blockchain, obviously I'm talking my own book, but I think blockchain will play a really important role in security through networks. You know, last month we were awarded a contract from DARPA, you know, the sort of research and development arm of the US military, to come up with a mechanism that you can formally verify networks. And that means that you're not relying on process or administrators or secrets or keys. There's actually a mathematical mechanism to verify the integrity of infrastructure. And that's a big deal. It's a big deal not just for military networks, but for all networks, because it completely changes how you think about security. And formal methods, which is basically applying mathematics to infrastructure, is a really exciting new area for security.
Well, what about yourself? Looking forward over the next year, what kind of excites you or perhaps scares you as well?
So we definitely see the world changing. People, for example, are moving more and more into hybrid environments where they don't have just one data center to protect. They have something on AWS, and that something might be by itself changing its size and the activity on an hourly or even on a minute base. They have something on premise. They have more than one thing typically on premise, something legacy which they still need to protect. And we see those customers especially find it harder and harder to just apply whatever they've been applying in the past. And we see a shift, which today we see mostly in the early adopter space. So a lot of the companies simply fail to secure the data center properly. The chief security officer of one of the largest software companies in the world told me, we run our data centers like Mexican prisons. We have walls around them, we have no idea what's going on inside. So this paradigm seems to be less and less effective for companies because those walls get breached. And often what we see is people who were not early adopters suddenly become early adopters, and it's typically because something happened to them. So definitely the world is changing, and as a security company which focuses on rethinking security inside data centers, we definitely feel that the world is changing our way.
Ariel, I wanted to ask you around, I guess, the concept of big established players versus small companies, or relatively small companies. You guys are kind of, relatively speaking, in the kind of early stages. How do you compete with big established players in the market?
Well, sometimes competing is easy. It's easy in the sense that you're doing something that they're not doing. Established players are many times focused on serving their existing customer base, in providing things that their customers are currently want. And a startup is actually looking 2 steps into the future and trying to build something that not exactly is in demand today, but will be in demand tomorrow. And when that tomorrow comes, we're ready, and the established player is still busy in the past.
That leads me on, Mike. One of the things that connects all of your companies, as well as being sort of fiery, forward-looking ventures, is that you've all taken investment and partnership with Cisco Investments at some point. How has Cisco Investments helped, I guess, sort of level up or step up in terms of competing with bigger players in the market?
Yeah, I mean, Guardtime has not taken investment capital from Cisco, but we are part of the EIR program, which is the Entrepreneur in Residence program. And it's just really been a fantastic experience, because how they help you, because Cisco is such a massive organization, and trying to navigate that as a startup can be all consuming. And so having people that are on the inside to help you guide your journey through the organization really made a big difference to us.
So people being fundamental, and I guess that's always what's said, both in terms of when investing in startups and working with startups. Well, what about if I put the question to yourself, what benefits have you felt being sort of connected, I guess, with Cisco Investments?
So we are very happy for having and very grateful for having Cisco as an investor. It has a lot of benefits. First of all, the fact that Cisco being a security-savvy company would not invest in a security startup without a deep dive into the technology and getting, in our case, we had to get thumbs up from two different business units, the security, SBU, and the data center business unit. So this by itself is serving us as a validation, which would be sometimes better than being validated by somebody like Gartner. Somebody who really understands the technology, who understands the customer, is a vote of confidence. And second, Cisco is a very supportive investor, and we see that today being invited here as a small company to present in such a huge event is extremely challenging. And getting this spot from Cisco Investment in the investment pavilion is an excellent chance for us to talk to customers, to talk to channels, and by the way, to talk to Cisco's own field people, because Cisco is a huge company and it's not enough to talk to the GM of a business unit. You also need to talk to the people in the field who are actually closing the deals.
I've been around the Cisco Investments stand, and I've seen long lines at different stands, and people genuinely interested, which is always very exciting to see. I always wonder, I guess, when with an investment like Cisco and support like Cisco, if there's ever any crossover between companies. Do you ever feel that you're ever doing something similar to another company that's also invested in it? And if so, if you've come across that, how do you manage that kind of challenge?
Yeah, and blockchain is so new, and there's so much hype and stupidity around blockchain that there's very few companies that are mature enough to actually work with a company like Cisco. So I think Guardtime is unique in that respect. We've been around a lot longer. Our revenues are much more significant than any other blockchain startup, and we have 150 people. So you need to have a certain size to be able to engage.
Yeah, that's a really, really valid point, and I think what I've been learning as I've been going around is where there are those sort of points of potential friction because of Cisco's size and scale in different markets and different people. It's been able to manage in a very successful way. I want to finish off by asking the same question to each of you, and it's one of those, of course, terrible futurist sort of questions, but I think our audience would be very interested. If you all looked 5 years into the future, what's the kind of most significant thing that could change, that would completely revolutionize the market you're in?
Well, we're looking at the continuous transition away from a hardware-centric approach to a software-centric approach. And we're getting further and further away from the hardware as being the source of value. The biggest change that's happening in the infrastructure space is the transition to a serverless architecture. Serverless computing, it's known as Amazon Lambda or Azure Functions, is a tectonic shift. And it's doing a massive transition of architecture, of how people think about their application, away from a hardware-centric approach to a pure software environment.
Mike, blockchain, of course, has come kind of from out of nowhere, really, and some might say. When you're looking into the future, what's the single most significant change you can foresee?
Yeah, I think it's a realization that blockchain is not cryptocurrency. I mean, the idea that you'd take this Bitcoin protocol and apply it to data centers and government and enterprise is just dumb. And so the way to do this, if you look at, for example, Estonia. So Estonia, in the US, healthcare fraud every year is $230 billion, according to The Economist. In Estonia, it's zero. And that's because of blockchain implementation into healthcare systems. So I think that once that realization happens that these things are possible, I think it'll transform society.
So more of an evolution than a revolution. You're kind of already on
we're right in the revolution right now.
Great. And Dror, finally, to yourself, when you're looking into the future, what unsettles you or excites you?
So in security, it's a very cyclical market where there's never one silver bullet. And what you see, if you look at the history of security, Typically, it's a cat and mouse kind of game where the attackers always take advantage of some changes of the technology, and then people like us and the rest of the industry play catch up and come up with an innovative solution to prevent that. And that probably will stay the case because actually the monetary motivation for the attacker is tremendous and will keep growing, and 5 years from today will be much larger. Today it's not really worthwhile you wearing a mask and robbing a bank, and this will be much more severe in the future. On the other hand, and that is what we see in our narrow part of the world, is that technology which changes can actually turn the table on the attackers. Instead of taking the legacy concepts of security and trying to catch up with whatever has changed in the world, what we see happening, and that's our forecast for 5 years from today, is actually those incredible technology which are so agile, so powerful inside data centers are actually going to make them much more secure than they ever were. And that's really our mission in life, and take my word on that, that 5 years from today actually data centers will be more secure and not less, although this is kind of counterintuitive to the process that we see generally in security.
So I like the fact that I'm going to have to take your word for it, and I absolutely will. I look forward to coming back in 5 years and interviewing all three of you and seeing absolutely where we got to. Ariel, Mike, Dror, thank you very much indeed, and thanks for joining us.